Okay. Good. Welcome. Thank you for coming to this conversation and talk on land back in Wabanaki. Wabanaki is the Wabanaki word for the place that we're in. Wabanaki, at Wabanaki homelands is how you would translate it. I heard someone asking if it was a made-up word, and it's not. Awania, my name is Mali Obomsawin, as you heard. Wabanaki Panamnia, Deluisi, Maliaket, Obomsawin, Nuiji Odanak, Awazus and Dodam. These are some of my relatives. This one is my great-great-grandfather, Simeon Obomsawin. This is a powwow at Odanak in the middle there. That's from just last year or a couple years ago. I'm probably related to all the men in this other photo. And I'm happy to be here. I'm from Odanak, and I'm from Farmington, and you can be from two places at once in that way. And I'll talk more about what that means. Can anyone tell us where we are? We are in the middle of the Kennebec. We're in Wabanaki homelands. This is a map from my nation's museum up in Quebec. And I think this map can tell us a lot about our understanding of our territory as Wabanaki people. This map comes from understandings of our land around the time of the creation of Odanak. So Odanak is way up here on the St. Lawrence River, if you can see my cursor.
Molly, we're going to put the lights down so people can see the slides better.
Okay, I'll pause. That's probably better, huh? Odanak is up here on the St. Lawrence River. All the green territory is what we think of as Wabanaki or Abenaki territory at the time that Odanak was founded, which is around 1700. You'll notice in this map that Passamaquoddy are included in Abenaki, the idea of Abenaki nations, and so is Penobscot. But Maliseets and Mi'kmaq at that time were not thought of as Abenaki. And so that tells us a lot kind of about our understandings of ourselves and our nationhood at that time. And I did want to also start out with defining the term Abenaki. I get a lot of questions from Wabanaki people as well as non-native people of what's the difference between Abenaki and Wabanaki. And the most simple explanation is that Abenaki is French for Wabanaki. So we ended up calling ourselves that when we ended up in French Canada, in Quebec. And people in what became the United States also called us that because we were engaging, doing treaties and other kind of diplomacy with the English, and we were called Abenaki by the English because we were with the French. That's the breadth of my understanding of that. I think it could be a much longer discussion, but it's not potato, it's potato, pomme de terre. In the 17th and 18th centuries, as we probably know, the French came down the St. Lawrence River Valley with Bibles and began colonizing in that style. The English came up the East Coast, and they wanted to trade, they wanted to establish forts, and so we see Wabanaki homelands being kind of engulfed in both sides by colonizing entities from Europe. And we also see lots of mission villages start to pop up. The French were very prolific with how they founded mission villages. They usually came to places that had traditional village sites, like at Norridgewock, right? And they would set up across the river or nearby to the traditional village site, and they would build a church, and they would start proselytizing in that manner. And so in this map, I love this map. I think it's so explanatory. We see where there's Indian villages, they're represented by the little teepee structure, and then you see there's the mission right next to them. And many of these places ended up becoming reservations after a long time. Odanak and Wolinak are no exception. So up here on the St. Lawrence River Valley, the first mission that Abenaki and Wabanaki people ended up coming to was actually here on the Chaudière River. It was called Sillery, and it was founded in 1637. And it was a refugee mission village for Wabanakis that were getting displaced from as far as Massachusetts. As we know, the King Philip's War was developing down there in the 1600s, the mid 1600s into the late 1600s. And so people from all the way down here fled up to Sillery in Canada. There were people from the Kennebec River who went up and got baptized up at Sillery because it was the first one, the first mission village. So this first village saw a lot of activity from Native people all over Wabanaki homelands, really. And by 1700, around that time, Sillery moved its population to what is now Odanak or St. Francis and what is now Bécancour over here right next to St. Francis. And those are the two federally recognized Abenaki communities in Quebec. And so when people say Abenaki nations, that is what they are referring to. Over time, Odanak and Wolinak took in a lot more refugees from this part of the homeland, from the Kennebec River all the way over to Lake Champlain in Vermont. So Odanak and Wolinak ancestors by river system, because as you know, we used birch bark canoes and the river systems to get around. That technology served us very well for a very long time. Odanak's population started out with Sokokis, who came from the Connecticut River Valley and over to Lake Champlain, who fled from King Philip's War and other early diseases that were brought by the English and French. And the Pennacook people from the Merrimack River Valley and the Winnipesaukee area were the next to go up to Odanak to become part of that population. And then you get the area of Maine where gradually the Saco River people, the people of the Amakongan River, which is now called the Androscoggin, the Kennebec River area and Moosehead Lake, the coastal region, which were called the Wabanaki people, especially around Merrymeeting Bay, and even members of what is, or relatives of the Penobscot Nation. I wanted to just slow down for a moment and underscore that the traditional name of the Androscoggin River is the Amakongan and not the Arsaguntukuk. There's a historian that got that confused early on, and I think that mistake has been repeated by a lot of historians and amateur researchers over the years. And so if anyone's listening who knows what I'm talking about, the traditional name is Amakongan because Arsaguntukuk is the traditional name of Odanak. And today, this is how we understand our ancestral territory. It is sprawling. It's bigger than the other nations' ancestral territories, and that's because we are made up of so many nations. So while I say, Abenaki is the same as Wabanaki, now the word Abenaki has this distinction, right? Because it refers to Odanak and Wolinak and our ancestors. And this is Abenaki territory that we're in. This is a map made by a nation. But of course, before all of the borders and the boundaries, our origin stories place us here since time immemorial. We have stories that have been passed down that tell us about the Ice Age, that talk about hunting mammoths and mastodons. So we have been here longer than archaeologists can name. And we know that, and we're waiting for Western science to catch up. This is a simple question. What is land back? Land back is returning the land to its original people. I'm going to play this for people online, but I don't think anyone in the room will be able to hear it. This is from a show called Res Dogs.
What do you suppose that means?
What, honey?
You see the graffiti on that sign back there?
Oh, yeah. I think it said land back, didn't it?
Well, what do you suppose it means?
Well, I reckon the Indians did it.
Well, sure they did. But I don't understand.
Hmm?
They mean the whole damn thing? They want the whole damn thing back?
Well, I suppose so.
That's just not possible. I could see some of it back. You reckon that's what they mean? Some of it back? Or all the damn thing?
I mean, the whites did kill an awful lot of them and took the land. So America ought to be ashamed of itself.
Well, they got the casinos. I hear they get paid $1,000 a month just to be an Indian.
Will you quit being a shit ass?
Well, that's
This ride is not fun anymore, and no, they don't. And whatever they get, they deserve.
Well, let's not get into a political discussion here. Let's just enjoy the Sunday drive.
You know, I am part Indian.
Yeah, and I'm part millionaire.
Yeah, you wish.
Anyway. Returning the land. Land back means giving the land back. That's also, I mean, I guess it's a made-up word, but most English words are made up. What is rematriation? Rematriation is the work of land back. Anyone can give land back. Anyone can get land. America makes it very easy to get native land. But resuming the relationship that indigenous people had with the land before it got taken away and before we got displaced from our land, that is rematriation, and that is where the real work comes in. That's the hardest part for so many reasons. There are so many of our relatives, specific species that are no longer here because of deforestation or development, animal species and plant species. There are so many of our foods and traditional medicines that either don't grow anymore or can't come here anymore, or that we can't harvest because they're polluted. And so part of rematriation is not only learning what those medicines and those relatives are, but also trying to heal them so that we can have that relationship with them again, right? If you can't eat the fish out of the river, you can't have that sacred relationship with the fish where it nourishes you. So in that same vein, rematriation is recentering the life-giving forces, and that is undoing the work of colonization. Obviously, I'm on the computer a lot, and I type the word rematriation, and it autocorrects as repatriation, of course, which is also important. But rematriation, because of this life-centering focus, it does aim to bring women and life givers back to the center of societies. As we know, European colonization has been very patriarchal, has been very misogynistic, and our traditions and our cultures were not like that before. And so we have to remember what it's like to have an equitable society in that way as well. There are different approaches to land back, more than just three even. It can look any number of ways. But in Maine, we have three major threads, I think. Of course, we have land going directly to the federally recognized tribes, the tribal governments, and that is a process that the Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement Act of 1980 made very difficult by setting up a lot of boundaries and hurdles to land being able to be returned to tribes. Tribes can hold land in two different ways. There can be fee land, which means they buy it, they pay taxes, or land into trust or reservation land, which means that we don't have to pay taxes to the US government on lands that our ancestors gave us. So obviously land into trust is preferable, but it's hard to do because of the Land Claims Settlement Act of 1980. There's community-based land back, communally held land, typically by nonprofits, so where Native-owned nonprofits buy land and hold it, or receive land in a direct return with no financial exchange. I'm avoiding the word donation because I don't think that applies. And then there's land access, which is the least preferable, but sometimes can be very useful to us, where particularly in places that have cultural or ecological importance to us, we develop legal agreements, memorandums of understanding or agreement for cultural use. This typically happens in conserved lands, conservation land trusts, and the legal structure of easements are a big inhibitor for Native people being able to use land in traditional cultural ways. So I just wanted to put that forward as like why land access and MOAs with conservation groups aren't ideal. One of the reasons. I guess I already talked about the challenges, but so like I said, trust land is preferable. Fee land is where you have to buy the land. The tribes have to buy the land. One of the biggest challenges laid out by the Land Claims Settlement Act of 1980 is that land going into trust has to be located in unorganized townships or unorganized counties. So it can't be in residential areas. Like if one of the federally recognized nations of Maine wanted to get this island back, for instance, they wouldn't be able to get it back in trust because this is a residential, like this is an organized township. So that cuts out a lot of sacred and ancestrally important places out of the ability to be really owned by tribes. On trust land, tribes also have jurisdiction, which is really important. Some successes in land going directly back into tribes. There have been successes, several recently in the last few years. One of them is an island called Wabanaki that came back to the Passamaquoddy tribe in 2021, I believe. If you can't read this from there, it was originally known as Wabanaki and renamed White's Island by settlers at some point, very original, in the 1800s. It actually was never formally taken out of reservation status. They just changed the name of it on the map, and then nobody talked about it for over 150 years. Yeah, and so it's amazing that they got it back without a lawsuit, but they did. A conservation land trust, I believe, bought this island and gave it directly back to the tribe. It was owned by a private landholder. That was very recent. I was excited to be part of the media team that covered that story. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to, oh gosh, I shouldn't have clicked on it. sunlightmediacollective.org. Okay, and learn more. Another successful land back story of the last few years for the Penobscot Nation. There is a foundation called the Elliottsville Foundation that returned 735 acres, that's not nothing, to the Penobscot Nation, and it connected lands that were already held by the tribe. And this is land directly into trust, so that's a really incredible thing that happened there. These successes would not have happened without the very hard work of Wabanaki educators, tribal government appointees, and knowledge keepers who have been working closely with over 65 organizations, landholding organizations, who are part of something called the First Light Learning Journey. So they work, First Light Learning Journey organizes the many, many conservation land trusts in Maine and beyond to learn from Indigenous people whose territory they are holding, and to learn and identify which lands the tribes want to have back, which ones they need access to, and they are directed by something called the Wabanaki Commission on Land and Stewardship, which is all Wabanaki people basically telling First Light what to do. It's great. I approve. So when we think about Wabanaki homelands, we're working in the framework of Maine, which you can kind of imagine where that is. I like to see the map without state boundaries. But this is a map of our entire homelands with just the river systems, which I love. And we've been building this map for a long time. These are very small. Maybe you can see them out there. It's a little blurry. The small red stars and the names are all traditional village sites. Most of them don't exist anymore as organized tribes, but these were places up until the 18th century, thereabouts, where Native people lived in community. The green dots are 19th and 20th century temporary villages that Odanak and Willenak actually established, trying to have more tribal home bases. So up here in Sartigan, that's like southern Quebec, very close to the Maine border, was a community of Penobscot and Abenaki people living together. Over in Durham, Abenaki people, the 17 families, I believe, moved there. There was a lot of basket trading, basket sales. That was our main source of income at Odanak and Willenak in the 1800s and 1900s. So we would come down our river systems over here and sell baskets all throughout the Lake Champlain Valley. And there was even an Abenaki community all the way down in Waterbury, Connecticut. So the Wabanaki people who got kicked out of Western Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont in the 1600s have been kind of returning to our homelands periodically, consistently, ever since. And Norridgewock is no exception in the Kennebec River, although we haven't had a community here, an organized community here, since 1724. I wanted to take a minute to talk about the Kennebec River's Abenaki history and what I know about it. At least I'm sure there's more to know, as always. But we think of the entire river system, so we think of the Kennebec and its tributaries as the home of Abenaki communities up through the 18th century. Closer to the coast, there is, actually around Augusta, there was a village called Kushnak or Kusinok. Members of that community moved north to Norridgewock when their lands were being impeded on in the 1700s, and they also went all the way up to Sillery, where I mentioned before. Thomas Obomsawin actually was baptized in 1678. He was from the lower Kennebec, I believe, in the middle Kennebec, and he went all the way up to Sillery to get baptized in 1678, of Bomazine renowned. Taconic, I think that's about where we are right now. Maybe someone can affirm that. We're pretty close. Norridgewock, obviously, was a village for a very long time. Other communities who gathered on the Kennebec included the Amiskanti from the Sandy River, Farmington area, as well as communities from the Sebasticook, the Carabasset, family bands. And I believe that many families who were had been at war with the English around the Wabanaki territories, because there were lots of English forts being established there around the end of the between the end of the Penobscot River and the end of the Androscoggin is what I consider to be Wabanaki territory. And those communities were displaced by the English and came to the Kennebec, but also especially moved to Willenac or Becancour up here on the St. Lawrence. That's where they broadly relocated to, in addition to Penobscot. Norridgewock, as Ashley Smith probably told you, is a place that is held deeply in intertribal Wabanaki memory. There are lots of histories and stories of Norridgewock, of the community itself, of the massacre that occurred in 1724. When that massacre happened, there were many survivors, and a few families went to Passamaquoddy before the attack even happened because they foresaw it. A few families went to Penobscot, to Indian Island, including Half-Arm Nicola, who was very famous for carrying the cross from Norridgewock all the way to Indian Island by foot. He had one arm. And 150 survivors went north to Odanak. So by the mid-1700s, they were very much integrated with our community up at Odanak. And one could say that we all at Odanak descend from Norridgewock because of the way that we intermarry. My family holds that story closely to us. And that is why we, along with several other families who carry stories of Norridgewock, established the Bomazine Land Trust in 2020. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're run primarily by Wabanaki women. And we use a hybrid model of conservation as well as community land trust dedicated to basically the work of rematriation, right? Protecting the land, resuming our ancestral relationships with the land, our cultural practices, and doing education as well. These are some beautiful beans that were gifted to us from Odanak. They're called Norridgewock beans. Our mission is to enable the Wabanaki people to renew and resume our caretaking and stewardship roles for lands and waters with historical, spiritual, and ecological significance. This is some corn that we grew in the first year of our organization. It's called Abenaki flint corn. This is our team right now. Sigwini Dana, Just Cree, Tegwango, Obomsawin, Lakota Sanborn, Ann Ranko, Monet Lavalley Garcia, Kessie Waters, and her nephew Joshi, and my dog who comes to everything with us. Her name is Lox. And yeah, I think I already kind of talked about what we do, but in the first few years, we have really built a lot from scratch. And we focused, because we started during the pandemic, we focused first really heavily on food sovereignty. We learned that our people weren't able to access ancestral foods. We didn't have the kind of health and lifespan that our ancestors did because we're not able to eat healthy and clean foods from our lands and from our rivers. And so we started growing food as one of the first things we did before we got any land. And the next year, we were able to get some land returned to us. And for both land return and food sovereignty, we had some incredible allies, two of whom are here in this room right now, and I want to acknowledge them, Jay Robinson and Ernie Hilton. You know, the work of land back requires all of us. And, you know, even non-Native people, maybe especially non-Native people, and we appreciate that. And we're also doing cultural transmission work, teaching our culture forward to the next generation, and we're educating at events like this, as well as with other groups with different focuses on decolonization and healing. This is some of what we've been up to. This is this year, up in the left corner. We had just planted a bunch of corn out on the Sandy River. Some of these photos are from last year's green corn ceremony that we organized, and we were passing out a lot of the food that we had canned and processed for community. This is at our new space that we got back in the Kennebec area. And yeah, these are some more pictures. We partnered with another Wabanaki nonprofit called Nabizin, who got some really incredible land back in Penobscot territory, Passadumkeag, and we were able to have that ceremony there at that place, and that was really special. So we're not the only ones doing land back work. We're not the only ones getting land back as Bombazine Land Trust, but we are trying to be a bridge for the whole land back movement to fill in gaps where they exist, and to be able to address a lot of the systemic issues that are facing our nations all at once. So we do a lot more than just get land. It's a lot more about community and empowering community and connecting the community with land for us. I did want to make a large and important point that land back includes waterways as well, and removing dams is a huge need and a huge part of it, especially on this river. You know, our fish can't go in their ancestral patterns. They can't access their ancestral territories either with these dams. Fish ladders don't work. They just don't. And we are not creating the amount of energy to be able to justify the amount of environmental destruction that the dams are causing throughout the territory and throughout the entire continent, frankly. So that's something we're fighting for. Yeah. This is a picture of my favorite river, the Sandy River. And I think that's kind of most of what I had to say. I wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, but I did want to direct your attention to our website, bomazinelandtrust.org. It's very easy to donate via the website, but if you need an address for snail mail, I can also provide that. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm happy to go back over anything, if anything I went through too quickly or if anything wasn't clear.
There was an online question if you do any educational talks for schools. I'm particularly interested in 3rd grade, 8 to 9 years old.
Awesome.
Why don't you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, sorry. Do you do any education for schools, particularly 3rd grade through 9th?
8 to 9 years old.
8 to 9 years old. 3rd grade, 8 to 9 years old. We don't typically do that only because there's limitations in our capacity. We have a small staff, but there are great organizations that do, and great Wabanaki individuals that focus on youth education. I think Barry Dana is like very renowned for that, and I know Wabanaki Reach does a lot of education too. So, yeah. Yeah.
You spoke of cultural transmission and some of the ceremonies. Is that the main way that you transmit some of the information about your culture?
So the question was, are ceremonies the main way that you transmit information about the culture? No, I think there's a lot of ways. I think as Wabanaki people, we learn by doing a lot. Like we don't, I mean, of course now we read books too, but I'm especially a little bit of a book nerd, but we typically go out on the land together and someone, asks us to help them, and then we learn from helping them. As far as sharing information outside of the Wabanaki community, I think it's just dealer's choice. Whoever's teaching it, they choose their style of how they want to do it, and when and where they think it's appropriate. Yeah. Yep.
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
First, you mentioned that the Maliseet and the Micmac were historically not considered part of the Wabanaki nation, and then they are.
Yeah.
So how did that?
That's a great
transition,
question.
And what's the what's the?
Yeah. The question was, I mentioned that this is for the chat, that the Maliseet and Mi'kmaq were not originally considered Wabanaki or Abenaki, and now they are, and how did that happen? I'm not sure exactly on the timeline and the details, but linguistically speaking, the Penobscot and the Abenaki, today's Abenaki, are really similar. And the further east that you go, the more the dialect changes. And so I think that has a lot to do with how the tribes originally aligned themselves and allied themselves. But in basically prior to contact, there were like a lot of really vast regional confederacies. Like you hear about the Wabanaki Confederacy today, but there were so many more. And at different periods in time, the Wabanaki Confederacy even reflected really different things. Like at one point, it was like centered in Ottawa, I think, and there were like Mohawk people involved in the Wabanaki Confederacy. So Confederacy has shifted a lot. I think around 1700, and if there are any historians in the chat, please correct me. Around 1700, the Wabanaki Confederacy, including what we consider today the 5 tribes, first gathered to try to address what to do about the warfare and the colonization, and also to end our disputes with the Mohawks. We had a lot of war with the Mohawks prior to that, and so they say. And basically, I think that fizzled out at some point in the 1800s, that particular first Wabanaki Confederacy, and then around the 1970s or 80s, the modern day Wabanaki Confederacy formed. So, Wabanaki just means the land where the sun first rises, to put it very broadly. So as a geographic linguistic marker, it applies to all of us and Wampanoag, all the way up to the Gaspé Peninsula. But today we're all Wabanaki. That's all I can say.
So my second question concerns cultural evolution. And like in modern society, Western society, it seems like cultural evolution is on kind of hyperspeed. And the native culture evolves over centuries. Seems like much slower.
Interesting.
So my question is, maybe that's not accurate, but correct me if it is.
Yeah.
If it is inaccurate, but my question is, how do you foresee tribal culture evolving into the future, and as we go through the 21st century, and what do you see looking out 7 generations?
Yeah. So the question was about cultural evolution and kind of what do I see as the trends and the projection of the future of the evolution of Wabanaki cultures. All the Wabanaki communities have like cultural differences as well as similarities. And we have always been very adaptive to cultural changes over time and embracing changes. We were the first to be recorded on wax cylinder recordings when they came out in the 1890s. The Passamaquoddy tribe was the first of any group. So we've embraced technology since it has evolved, and we embrace fashion changes. Like early on, we were very attracted to some of the French medallions and the copper pots that they had. Basically, from the beginning, our stance has been if the technology is efficient and useful, we'll use it. So, you know, we loved frying pans. We thought that watches and clocks were useless noisemakers because we had a more sophisticated understanding of time, actually, you know. And I think as far as evolution goes and the kind of like hyperspeed of, you know, American culture, I think it's easy to see American culture that way because America is so young. It's like a tiny blip in the expanse of time. What is it, like 250 years? I don't even know. 300 years? Not even. So compared to over 12,000 years that Wabanaki people have been here, I think, you know, we adapt a lot, but we also know the importance, because of the wisdom of over 12,000 years, we know the importance of holding on to knowledge that's older too. Yeah. Yes?
I wonder if you would comment a little bit about the Indian land claim settlement. At the time, that was, you know, historic and seemed to be a step forward in terms of land back, but obviously there have been a lot of issues subsequent.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question was if I could comment on the Maine Indian Land Claims Settlement Act. I don't want to say too much because I'm not part of any of the tribes that it applies to. What I know is that there was some language that was slipped into it that undermined the sovereignty, or the state is now acting as if the tribes lost their sovereignty based on that act. And I think even at the time, some people recognized that and some people didn't, but I'm not the one to tell that story. And I also think that the tribes in the 1980s, the 70s, were in a state of poverty that is unimaginable to any of us in this room. And the idea of being able to like get enough money to like survive the next few years was, you know, seemed important. Yeah.
But in my own study of other cultures, that to counter assimilation, that one of the main tools is to educate children in their own schools, in schools that will promote their way of being rather than promoting, you know, sort of this homogeneous kind of outlook. And I wonder if that's something that your group is focusing on, like the return, as it were, of a school system or a way of educating the children.
Yeah, so the question is about combating assimilation through educating children. And Wabanaki children. Yes, thank you. I believe most of the Wabanaki tribes in Maine have their own schools for children. I know Penobscot Nation does. I'm pretty sure Sibayak does too. And at Odanak, we have, I believe we have at least like children's programs. And so it is happening through Bombazine Land Trust. We are interested in that, and we have many community members who come and bring their kids to the events. So it happens that way. There's also a great effort called the Wabanaki Rematriation School, put together by Eastern Woodlands Rematriation, which is another great Wabanaki group who's focused on like really systematizing a Wabanaki education for kids. That's across the whole territory, that isn't necessarily in a classroom, you know, because that's, again, like, it's better to learn about plants around plants than at a desk. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of efforts happening in that way. We have a comment from the chat that I just wanted to read out that says, settler culture evolution seems to move at the speed of business and money. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you found an effective way to dealing with dam removal and/or anadromous fish passage?
An effective way to deal with dam removal?
Have you found an effective way to deal with fish passage and or dam removal?
Me personally, I have ideas about how to.
Have you participated in the FERC process at all?
I personally no. I mean, I gave testimony when it came up on the Kennebec River and advocated through NRCM and NCRM.
Yeah, it is NRCM.
NRCM, thank you. And we advocate by spreading awareness. I wrote some articles, personally. I would love to see someone just go over there and pull out whatever bolt is the key one. But and I.
How about the 4 main stem dams?
Yeah, yeah.
So you were dealing with Nick Bennett.
Sorry.
So you were dealing with Nick Bennett and NRCM?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The river systems map that you shared, the one without state borders,
Mm-hmm.
is that available on your website?
The river systems map is not yet available on our website. We can try to put one up. Yeah, it's a great map.
Has that map been collected by the Osher Map Library?
No, it hasn't, no. It's a community map with ancestral names that we've been gathering over a long time because those names aren't really available outside of community knowledge keepers who haven't been asked yet, basically. So there is knowledge out there that the state doesn't own yet. Yeah.
Was the work of the mission seen as a positive thing by the Native people?
Was the work of the missions seen as a positive thing by the Native people? That, from the very beginning, the answer would probably be yes and no, because there was always a large faction of people that were vehemently anti-friar against the Jesuits, against the missionaries. And there were people who were agnostic as well, that there are other spiritual medicines out there and other spiritual knowledges that we might not have yet, because that's the 13,000 years of wisdom, right? Like, you don't know everything. And I think that one of the anecdotes that I often tell about the Jesuits is when we started getting sick and not having the medicine to cure European diseases, the Jesuits told us it was because we didn't pray to the right God, right? So was it seen as good? I'm not sure. I don't think it helped in that case. And it definitely didn't help in Canada when the residential schools started stealing all of the children and raping them, and letting them die of starvation at the residential schools. Like, I don't have a lot of patience for, for that now. I think at the beginning they were more open to see what kind of relationships were supposed to be built.
I'm curious about why we call the St. Lawrence River the St. Lawrence and also the St. John.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Saints, all the saints. Yeah, so the question is, why do we call the St. Lawrence and the St. John those names? Actually, like, the entire region of Quebec is called like the saintly region, because it's just every single town is saint this, saint that. And St. Francis, that's where my tribe is. And I think it's because that was just their style of colonization, was just like build the church, call it the name of the saint, move on. The traditional name of the St. Lawrence, I think, is just Gajidek, which means big river, because it's the big one, kind of like Katahdin, like basically just means the big mountain, because it's like just the one that's there. It's like so monumental and like impossible to not recognize that you just call it a simple name. Yeah. Any other questions? Another one, yeah.
I wondered if folks in this area of the world feel any kinship with indigenous peoples around the world. Do they have a relationship in any way, or a solidarity, or a working relationship with indigenous movements in other parts of the world?
Yeah. So the question is, do indigenous people from this part of the world have a solidarity and relationship with indigenous people from other parts of the world? Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. There's like lowercase indigenous, like indigenous plants, and then there's like uppercase indigenous, and I think there's a definition somewhere of uppercase indigenous, but it's a lot of the communities that have been colonized by Europe in recent times, right? Especially in English, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the U.S. And South America as well, Mexico, the Western Hemisphere. And there is definitely a solidarity and a collectivity and relationships that have actually existed for a lot longer than our relationships with Europeans. For example, the Polynesian people, discovered the Western Hemisphere a lot longer ago than any of us can even name. And I think potatoes from Chile or from South America somewhere like got all the way over to New Zealand. You know what I mean? Like we had these global trade systems actually navigating by the stars, for a very long time before Columbus discovered that the Earth wasn't flat and whatever. So. So there's a solidarity and relationships that are being built, especially across the continental North America and South America. I think there's a lot there. Yeah. Yes.
Think about the migration following the glaciers moving north.
Mm-hmm.
Do the Wabanakis who formed the Wabanaki, were they coming from the south? Were they coming from the west? There are pre-Wabanaki people that must have followed the glaciers before.
So the question is about glacial retreat and like what happened before the Wabanaki, or how did we engage in the movement as the glaciers were retreating? Our creation stories, there are many of them, but they tell us that we are from here, just right here. This is where we happened, and we came from all of these species and plants and trees that grow exactly here, right? I don't know, I think that there have been some problematic historians and archaeologists that have written about like the red paint people being like a different people than the Wabanaki, and I don't think we see it that way. I think that's like a modern non-native writer that wants to say that. It's kind of like the Bering Strait theory, like the idea that we came from somewhere else, like we didn't, sorry. Like people are really trying to like tell us that we did, but we didn't. Yeah. Although we do like remember the glacial retreat happening, right, which is, I think, says a lot, right? We have stories about the water switching the other way and the water being gone, right? And then the water coming back. So like, yeah, like didn't make that up out of nothing, it reflects what we know through Western science and predates it. So I think it just was a documentation of a different form. Yeah. Oh, we've got a question in the back. Oh, yeah.
We had some presentations earlier last summer and fall, which included the notions that were perpetuated by the document discovery. And I'm wondering, when the 6 or 7 of you, or 8 of you, or more gather and speak about these things about miniaturation and land back issues, how does the conversation go amongst you about the doctrine of discovery and how it may affect both conversations like these and conversations amongst yourselves about how to approach what you're doing and what you'd like to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a barrier?
Right. The question was, how does the doctrine of discovery play into our conversations and our work in land back? I don't think about it too often, honestly. I mean, it is the foundational concept and piece of like global law, right? Because the Catholic Church was writing laws. It's a foundational piece of law that created American property law. So if you trace American property law all the way back to the first one, I think it's 1823, Johnson v. McIntosh, you see the doctrine of discovery cited. You might have learned this in your last session, which is like hilarious. They're like, yes, we're going to found a nation on the separation of church and state. Okay. But I don't know how it plays in that the Pope recently, like, didn't he like apologize for it or something? Have they revoked it yet? I don't know. Like, it's not going to change anything because America is committed to all kinds of fallacies. You know, it's built on bad ideas that that contradict each other, right? And so I don't think America is going to have any problem with another one, even it being foundational. Many of the other contradictory ones are foundational. We can't write laws, you know, as Wabanaki, as a nonprofit land trust getting land back. Like, we can't be like, by the way, we don't acknowledge the doctrine of discovery, because the way that that's going to play out is the town who gets to tell us whether or not we can have the land is going to be like, this seems weird. Like, they're putting question into like the title, so maybe they shouldn't get this land. You know what I mean? Like, we can't really like go toe to toe in property law in the town of Skowhegan, you know, against the AG, you know. So, yeah. But
How does it fit with townships as opposed to organized towns or villages? Can you clarify that?
yeah. So during the talk, I mentioned that the federally recognized tribes can't get land into trust unless it's in like a disorganized township, unorganized township. But as a 501c3 nonprofit, that doesn't apply to us. So like any other conservation group, we can get land pretty much anywhere. There's like questions about like taxes that come up. I guess the towns decide whether or not we pay taxes, you know, like that's the law in Maine. But we can get land anywhere that anyone else can get land, except for federally recognized tribes.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things that I've talked to several of the Penobscot members about is the whole concept of the corn growing that's happened in this area. And apparently not that much was happening up in the Penobscot. That the Kennebec was sort of the furthest north that it was going. And I'm wondering and I'm sure that you are involved in that, in some of the ceremonies and some of the processes that you're using in your rematriation work. But what is your understanding about how the corn got here? Because I think everyone sort of understands that it came from Central America to begin with and then slowly migrated north. But I'm just curious. We asked Barry Dana this question last week, and he wasn't sure. He thought maybe 600 years. He just didn't know what the process was about how it came.
Interesting.
And do you have any stories about that?
The question is, how'd the corn get here? And I am certain that it was traded, and with the trading, slowly it came north. We have some songs that are similar songs. I don't know if they have to do with corn or not, but we have some songs that are similar songs to what like I think the Muskogee people sing down there, right? We have some songs that you're like, whoa, like, and I'm a musician and like folklorist in that way, and like, so it's fascinating to me, but being like, oh, it's clear that this song and this other song are related to each other, or like were once the same and then evolved into different musical traditions of different tribes, you know. So I think in the same way, when we would trade corn, we would trade knowledge that comes with the corn. If there's a story that comes with it, if there's a dance that comes with it, and then that evolves over time as well. I don't know when it happened, but it's clear that corn was a huge part of our identity and our economy and our diplomacy. I imagine you learned about that from Ashley as well, that corn from this water system held together pre-colonial Confederacy relations in Wabanaki and probably beyond.
Yeah.
There is corn that grows up in Unama'ki too, and in Mi'kma'ki, like there's corn that grows up there. It's just different and smaller, like more funny looking. But all corn is equal. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really important point that I probably didn't talk about enough, though, is that this region was the reason that it got attacked so brutally and so consistently, actually, for like many years in a row, was because the community here was the center of the Wabanaki power. It was the center of our organizing and our warfare. It was the furthest, Jesuit stronghold as well, with our relationship with Father Rails. But the corn was everything, and the other crops that go with the corn. And when Captain Moulton and his troops attacked at Nurajwak, they not only came to the village site and the mission site and, viciously killed many people, especially women and children, they also trudged up the Sandy River to our women's planting grounds and destroyed them because they didn't want us to be able to come back and get the food, And so being able to grow corn and squash and beans and ancestral varieties on the Sandy River now through Wabanaki Land Trust is like a level of ancestral healing that I don't know if anyone else in this room can understand. Yeah. Yeah, question?
Could I tell a little corn story?
Sure, corn. I love corn stories.
Years ago, I found a sample of the Gaspé flint. A man in Indiana had it.
Wow.
And he had gotten it from somebody in middle or western Canada. And it had obviously come from Gaspé. And I was growing it each year in my garden and giving it away to different people. And I gave some to Ann Mefford. She grew it the first year in a greenhouse, and it didn't till her in the greenhouse. The second year, she planted it outside. And just before it was ready to pick, I visited, and the ears grow this close to the ground.
Yeah.
And they're short.
Yeah.
And the first glance would suggest, well, that's not important.
No.
But that one plant had a single stalk and 6 tillers. And every tiller and the central stalk had an ear. So there were 7 ears of corn from one tiny seed. And I said, Ann, and I'm not trying to put Ann down. I said, Ann, this stuff is ready to harvest and you have to protect it. You have to protect it. She said, and maybe it was her husband, it doesn't matter. And they said, yeah, we have the fence, we have this, we'll get that up. And that night, the porcupine came.
No, not the porcupine.
and took it off.
Oh.
So we still plant it every year, and we give it away. But the point I'm trying to make about it is that we disparage something that seems insignificant until we learn to live with it and see how truly extraordinary it is. And when I saw seven stalks from one seed with 7 ears of corn, I said, wow, that is a miracle, and we need to preserve it.
Absolutely. Yeah, corn diversity all the way. Absolutely. Yeah.
On the banks of the Kennebec and Emden, there's petroglyphs. And the only other site I know of is down east in Passamaquoddy land. Have you ever known anyone to do research on why so few sites in Maine or anywhere else are petroglyphs where they basically put in their history on ledge and then no place else?
Yeah, so the question is, why are there so few places with petroglyphs?
I mean, it's a documentation, you
Yeah.
go up there and
Yeah.
you basically see an amazing amount of history
Yeah.
in a very small space.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I,
gonna last the test of time. And I just thought it was very strange when I saw it and did some research on it, that it's one of the few sites in the entire state or region.
yeah. I think there are a lot of differing views on what the petroglyphs depict and how important it is. I know some people say that it's just ancient graffiti. That being said, we do not encourage modern graffiti to happen on top of it, which does happen. And yeah, and other people believe that there is like really important knowledge in there. I think that there are probably a lot more sites than we know about. Again, one of those things where like there is still knowledge out there that's not owned by the state or hasn't been printed by the main museum of history, you know, and same with the locations of other.
Well, I believe that land's owned by the Penobscot.
It's not actually.
It is not.
No, it's under the National Registry of Historic Sites, so it is protected. It's not owned by the Penobscots. It's privately owned.
So it's owned by the
Weren't
Penobscot.
some destroyed in dam creation as well?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot of important petroglyphs were destroyed in dam creation, and just like I think just like other development projects too. Like there were probably a lot of petroglyphs that weren't directly on the rivers that got turned over, you know, and didn't get noticed. And I know down in like Shelburne Falls area, there's a bunch of Wabanaki petroglyphs that our ancestors left there that got graffitied over. Like someone paid. It might have been like a conservation group or like a historic house even. They like paid some artist to like chisel them in to make it clearer what they were making out, which as like with the minimal knowledge of like archaeology that I have, it makes me combust. But yeah, there's a lot of problems with graffiti, and those sites should definitely be protected. Oh, yeah.
How do we go about preserving those petroglyphs? Because, you know, we come down the river a lot, and you see kids out there playing on the rock, and, you know,
Yeah.
it's gonna get destroyed.
Yeah, that's a good question. How do we go about preserving the petroglyphs? I think the one on the Kennebec is particularly vulnerable. And yeah, I mean, I think the best way to do it is to make sure that it's held by the people with the biggest incentive to preserve it. You know, one of the tribes or a tribal entity, tribal people at least, you know, whose ancestors may have done that petroglyph, made that petroglyph, you know, but as well, I think like just education about why you don't graffiti them, why you need to maybe like keep a distance or respectful distance, right? I don't know, I have a hard time advocating for like fences, and especially if they're in the middle of a river, but like I think that
Even a sign.
yeah,
posting it,
yeah,
you know,
a sign could work, yeah, but
explain the, you know, what it means.
yeah, but signs can do both things, you know, they can caution people and people respect that, or they can let people know that something important is there, and if they have bad intentions, they'll be even more set on, you know, I think there's like a lot of reasons why people don't post as well. I don't know what's the best answer, but I know there's differing views on that too, so wish I had the answer to how.
And it's just not, a lot of people can't see it, you know, there's not neighbors that have
Yeah,
immediate access.
yeah, for sure.
So Molly, how is the Obomsawin Trust buying land? Is it through donations?
How is Obomsawin Land Trust getting land back? We have been directly returned land by the Presbyterians of Northern New England, who were trying to offload some land that was theirs for a while, and that was just a transfer. We prefer to not have to pay for the land that our ancestors passed down to us for obvious reasons. There will be exceptions, you know, but we work closely with members of the First Light Learning Journey who have facilitated a lot of successful land returns, like I talked about a couple of them. And again, I think public education is really important because land to us isn't just property, you know, it's like a stolen ancestor, like the amount of knowledge that we can learn from that land, the amount of like ancestral memory that that land has for us that it might need to share with us. You know, just having access to land itself helps us heal, literally heal ourselves, you know, through our ancestral medicines and foods. So I think educating conservation groups and other large landholders is like a big part of the process of land back, because it's really easy to just give land back to the original stewards. It's not hard. You know, I think the biggest problem that we run into a lot with conservation groups and nonprofits is that there will be one person, as well actually as private landowners, there will be one person who's like, you know, their intentions are really good and they're really excited about the idea of returning land to Indigenous people, but like their board won't approve it, or their sibling who is going to inherit the land won't approve it, right? And so I think like it's not just us that are needing to do the educating, it's also like individual people who are excited about the justice that happens with land back, that they can educate other people as well. Yeah. Didn't really answer your question, but I tried a little bit.
Well, it gives you an idea.
Yeah.
In other words, you're not buying it.
Yeah, not usually.
That makes me think about, you know, a group like the Nature Conservancy
Mm-hmm.
that has a lot of money,
Mm-hmm.
they get a lot of land.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever partner with them to have it then pass on through the Nature Conservancy to Indigenous people?
Yeah, so the question is, do we partner with large organizations like the Nature Conservancy to have it pass through to Native people? We're definitely open to that, and we are working, I know on the other side of the border, we're actually working with TNC as their like Canadian equivalent to talk about that kind of thing. I know other tribes in Maine definitely have partnered with large organizations like that. So yeah, that's like ideal, you know. Yeah, that's the best possible way, as long as, you know, yeah, it's good. Well,
For all those questions, everybody.
yeah, thank you so much
so
for
much
your
for
questions,
answering.
for having me. Melanie.